We have identified the oldest unidentified homicide victim in Massachusetts.
Back in 1974, a woman was found murdered in the dunes of Cape Cod. No ID, no missing person report. She was known only as the Lady of the Dunes, a faceless mystery buried in silence.
After 48 years of the unknown, science helped investigators put a name to the victim of a gruesome crime in the dunes of Provincetown back in 1974. Ruth Marie Terry was only known as the Lady of the Dunes until now.
Parts of her body had been removed. Her face disfigured. Someone had gone to great lengths to erase her. For decades, detectives, artists, psychics, and even curious locals tried to name her, to find who took her life. But now, the truth has finally surfaced, and it didn't bring peace. It brought a darker twist no one saw coming. Who was she? Who killed her? And how did a man hide this horror for nearly 50 years? The discovery. The story of the Lady of the Dunes began on July 26, 1974, in Provincetown, Massachusetts, a quiet beach town at the edge of Cape Cod. A 12-year-old Leslie Metcalf was walking through the dunes with her dog when she spotted something strange in the sand. At first, she thought it might be a blanket someone had left behind. But as she got closer, she realized that there was a body. It was a woman's body without clothes, decomposed, and face down in the warm dune grass. And just like that, Provincetown's peace shattered. The police were called in immediately, and the investigation began under a cloud of unease. The injuries were severe. Her body had been deliberately altered in ways that made identification nearly impossible. This wasn't just a murder. It felt intimate, controlled, and maybe even ritualistic. Whoever had done this hadn't just tried to kill her, they had tried to erase her. But there were subtle ones. About 15 feet from where the victim's body lay, there were tire tracks. Leading away from the corpse were 2 sets of footprints. Investigators also determined that she had about $10,000 worth of gold crowns in her mouth, suggesting she had money, or someone in her life did. Her legs were perfectly smooth, freshly shaved, which may have meant she was alive shortly before her death. Her auburn hair was tied back neatly in a ponytail, and under her head lay a pair of blue jeans, carefully folded, as if someone had placed them there as a pillow deliberately. Someone walking by might even assume that she had simply fallen asleep on the beach, except that this woman had been nearly decapitated. It was like someone cared just enough to tidy her, but not enough to let her live. But who was she? That was the question no one could answer. Decades of dead ends. Forensic experts tried to gather whatever they could, but it was already too late. The body had been there for a while, maybe 2 weeks, maybe more. The hot sun and salty air had done their damage. There was no ID, no purse, and no car nearby. No one had reported a woman missing who matched her description. Flyers were posted. Police sketches were made. Forensic artists tried to reconstruct her face. Her image was circulated across New England, and law enforcement followed every lead they could find. They cross-checked missing persons from across the country. They combed through dental records, but no one came forward. She was completely unknown. And that, in many ways, was the most unsettling part of all. How could a woman simply vanish off the face of the earth so violently and leave behind no family, no name, no history? Meanwhile, the case shocked the locals of Provincetown, a place better known for artists than for crime. Word spread fast through Provincetown, and residents were shaken. This was a quiet beach town, used to tourists and calm summers. But now, with a woman's body found near the dunes, a haunting cloud settled over the community. The case stumped investigators like former Provincetown Police Chief Jeff Jaran. Locals volunteered information. Some even joined in the searches, combing the dunes for clues. It was Provincetown's mystery, as much as it was the FBI's. The town of Provincetown buried her under a modest headstone in St. Peter's Cemetery. The grave was marked Unidentified Female, along with the year 1974. People in Provincetown began calling her the Lady of the Dunes. And so began one of the most enduring and tragic mysteries in American criminal history: investigations and theories. By the time the 1980s rolled around, the case of the Lady of the Dunes had already started to fade into the background as just another unsolved mystery collecting dust in police files. But the investigators weren't ready to let her go. In 1980, 6 years after the body was first discovered, they made a bold, almost desperate move. They exhumed her remains, dug her up from her anonymous grave. They thought that maybe something had been missed, and maybe new forensic techniques could reveal what the 1970s had overlooked. Maybe a new dental expert could trace her expensive dental work. Maybe they'd find a match somewhere, somehow. At the time, technology was still limited. DNA analysis wasn't yet a reliable tool in their arsenal. But there was hope that something, anything, would stand out this time. Even the smallest detail could crack open the case. But nothing useful came from it. So they buried her again. Then, in the year 2000, they tried once more. Another exhumation. But this time, they came better prepared. Forensic science had come a long way. Investigators now had access to CT scanning technology and more advanced facial reconstruction techniques. So, they created detailed 3D images of her skull, built digital composites, tried to restore the face that had once smiled, laughed, cried, lived. For the first time, people could look her in the face, or at least a recreation of it. Then, they released these new composite sketches to the public, plastered her reconstructed image in newspapers, on TV, and later across the internet, with the hope that someone might recognize her. But still, nothing. As the world changed, dial-up became broadband, VHS became YouTube, and the Lady of the Dunes stayed silent. But she was never forgotten. In 2010, she was entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, known as NAMOS. Investigators uploaded everything they had: her estimated age, the forensic sketches, dental records, even the sand-covered jeans and blue bandana found near her body. And still, year after year, it was the same frustrating result. Still, the mystery captured imaginations, and in the absence of answers, theories began to swirl. One woman from Boston reached out to the police after seeing a facial reconstruction of the victim. She said that the woman looked like her sister, who had disappeared back in 1974. Another woman contacted the police to let them know she'd seen her father strangle a woman in the 1970s, and the Lady of the Dunes could be his victim. But neither of these possible tips turned out to be what the police were searching for. Then, at one point, investigators suspected that the victim could be Rory Jean Kessinger, a known drug dealer and bank robber. Kessinger resembled the victim, and she had escaped from the Plymouth County Correctional Facility in Massachusetts in 1973. But when a DNA test was carried out, it proved that the Lady of the Dunes was not Kessinger. Another popular rumor was that she was killed by Whitey Bulger, the infamous Boston mobster who frequented the area and had been in the company of a woman who looked like the victim. Bulger spent a lot of time at the Crown and Anchor in Provincetown as he engaged in drug and arms deals. He also had a reputation for pulling teeth and cutting off hands to hide his victims' identities, which is exactly what happened here. An example is one woman that Bulger allegedly strangled to death, who turned up in a marshy area at the Neponset River in eastern Massachusetts. And, like the Lady of the Dunes, her teeth were missing. However, he was never considered a suspect in the Lady of the Dunes' murder. Another killer was also a potential suspect. Imprisoned murderer Haddon Clark confessed to killing the Lady of the Dunes in the year 2000. However, there was no evidence linking Clark to the crime, and he suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, which made his confession unserious. Meanwhile, others believed she might have been a runaway, or even a drifter passing through Provincetown during the wild days of the 70s. There was even a bizarre pop culture twist. In 2015, a writer named Joe Hill, the son of Stephen King, claimed he spotted a woman in the 1975 movie Jaws who looked just like one of the forensic sketches of the Lady of the Dunes. Hill noticed that a woman in the background of one of the film's scenes matched the victim's description. She also appeared to be wearing a pair of jeans and a blue bandana, two items that were found at the crime scene. So, some speculated that she might have been an extra in Jaws, the Spielberg classic filmed just a stone's throw away on Martha's Vineyard in the summer of 1974, the same summer her body was discovered. But Jaws producers had not recorded the names of any extras, and retired Staff Sergeant Warren Tobias, who chased the Lady of the Dunes' identity for 20 years, was skeptical of this theory. But one question on everyone's mind was, could it be her? At the time of filming, the woman's body had not yet been found. Was it possible she had been an extra in the movie, then killed just days or weeks later? It was a chilling thought, and it went viral. But ultimately, it was just another dead end. Investigators kept circling the same frustrating reality. They didn't even know who she was. Without a name, how could they trace her steps, or find her killer, or understand the motive? It wasn't just a murder mystery. It was an identity mystery, and it stayed that way for almost 50 years, until science and a little bit of luck finally caught up with the past. The breakthrough. 2022 was that year, nearly half a century after her body was first discovered in the dunes. After decades of blind alleys, false leads, and frustrating dead ends, the FBI announced that they had finally identified her. And it all started with a little bit of DNA. You see, science had come a long way since the 1970s, especially forensic science. But what really changed the game was genetic genealogy. It's the same technology that helped catch the Golden State Killer in 2018 by using public genealogy databases to trace DNA through distant relatives. And that's where Othram Inc. came in, a private lab that specializes in exactly this kind of work. The FBI handed over what little DNA they had from the Lady of the Dunes, and Othram got to work. Months passed, and the process was slow, but then a match happened. It was a distant cousin, then another, and another. Piece by piece, they built a family tree, backwards, sideways, through second cousins and great aunts, until it all pointed to one name: Ruth Marie Terry. The Lady of the Dunes, now known as Ruth Marie Terry, was born in Tennessee in 1936. She was a real person and a woman with a past. When her name was revealed, the people of Provincetown reacted like they were hearing about an old friend. Newspapers reported an outpouring of emotion from residents. They had never met her, but for years, they had watched over her memory. Finally, after 48 years, the nameless woman in the Provincetown dunes had an identity. She was Ruth, and she had a family, and as investigators would soon learn, secrets. Shocking twist. After identifying Ruth Marie Terry, investigators learned that she had gotten married shortly before her murder to a man named Guy Rockwell Moldavan. The newlyweds had traveled after their wedding and had even stopped in Tennessee to see Terry's family. But in the summer of 1974, Moldavan returned alone. He told Terry's family that they'd had a fight during their honeymoon and that he hadn't heard from her since. Disturbingly, Moldavan also mentioned to other people that his wife had died. But here's the strange part. No one ever filed a missing person report for her. Not her husband, not her family. It was as if she had just vanished. And for decades, everyone just assumed she went off the grid. It was a breakthrough that shook true crime circles. But the biggest shock of all was yet to come. Because once investigators started digging into Ruth's life, they realized that her death wasn't just a tragedy. It was part of a much darker story. Ruth Marie Terry was actually murdered by Guy Rockwell Moldavan, her husband, her brand new husband. The man she had just married, the man she was last seen with before she vanished into thin air. And the more investigators looked into him, the more their blood ran cold. This wasn't just some random guy. No, Moldavan had a past straight out of a horror movie. Guy Moldavan was adopted. His father had issues with alcohol and mental illness. So he later moved with his mother to New Mexico, before settling in Seattle, Washington, with his first wife, Jo Ellen Loop. At that point, Guy had created a business for himself of selling antiques. According to the investigation, Moldavan had a reputation for being a womanizer. There were stories that he liked to entertain women in the antique shop after hours. Anyway, the marriage to Loop ended after about a decade, and Moldavan quickly moved on to mother of three, Manzanita Mearns. Manzanita and her oldest daughter, Dolores Mearns, moved in with the antiques dealer, while her two younger children stayed with their father in Canada. Moldavan, then going by the name Guy Rockwell, later approached an attorney to help him get a divorce, claiming that his wife, Manzanita, had abandoned him. When she failed to show up at the hearing, the divorce was granted, and just days later, he married his third wife, Evelyn Emerson. But that marriage didn't last long either. After convincing Emerson's parents to write him a check for $8,000 as part of a supposed plan to buy antiques in Canada and then resell them for more in the United States, Moldavan disappeared without ever buying the merchandise. An arrest warrant was soon issued for larceny, and when detectives went to his home in August of 1960, they made a grim discovery. Although there was no sign of Moldavan, police did find pieces of human remains inside a septic tank. Police believed these were clues strongly suggesting that a violent crime had occurred, including forensic traces later linked to missing persons, Manzanita and her daughter Dolores. Moldavan was discovered living in New York City in December 1960 after a huge manhunt. Although authorities questioned him for 2 weeks about what happened to Manzanita and Dolores, Moldavan never admitted to anything. And, seemingly without enough evidence to link him to the crime, investigators weren't able to bring charges against him. Moldavan was convicted, however, of grand larceny for stealing money from his third wife's family and spent time behind bars before he was released in 1962. Then, he went on to marry Ruth Marie Terry, the Lady of the Dunes, and no one connected the dots. He changed jobs, changed cities, and even changed his name now and then. When Ruth married him in 1974, she likely had no idea. She probably thought she was starting over. But less than a year later, she was dead, mutilated and left in the dunes like a forgotten piece of trash. And Moldavan just kept going, living his life. After Terry's death, Moldavan went on to marry a fifth wife, Phyllis Smyrl. But that relationship didn't last either. He spent his last days before his death working as a radio talk show host. Moldavan died in 2002 after a lengthy illness, according to his obituary. It wasn't until August 2023 that the FBI formally named him as Ruth Marie Terry's killer, almost 50 years later. But here's the detail that hits the hardest. Although Moldavan had already died years earlier, it seemed he may have been referencing his wife's death in his disturbing cookbook called cooking with rump oil. One recipe in the book, called Cape Cod shid, featured a strange drawing of a creature with long, wavy hair, much like Terry's had been at the time. He also wrote, "After the shid is caught, anything over 5 minutes ends it. The sweet turpentine taste will turn to that of a burnt glove, and the tender look will become one of despair." Perhaps that was the moment when he watched the life go out of Terry's eyes, when she realized he was going to kill her, and that is horrifying. While the mystery of the Lady of the Dunes was technically solved, it left behind a trail of uncomfortable questions. Why wasn't he caught in the 1960s? Why was Ruth's disappearance never flagged more aggressively? And how many other women might be lost in his trail? The family she left behind. While investigators were chasing cold leads and the public was spinning conspiracy theories, Ruth Marie Terry's family, the people who actually knew her, were living with a different kind of mystery. She was a daughter, a sister, and a mother. Yes, a mother. Ruth had a biological son named Richard Hanchett before she met Guy Moldavan, whom she placed for adoption when he was a baby, and they lost touch. But decades later, long after her murder, he began searching for her, not knowing she'd already been buried under a different name for nearly 50 years. Can you imagine searching for the woman who gave you life, only to find out she died a brutal death long before you even started looking? When Terry was finally identified, her son was one of the first people notified. Her family had no idea where she went in 1974. They thought she might have just cut ties, disappeared, to start over, maybe. That's what people were told back then when someone went missing without a trace, especially a woman. Her niece, Brittany Tatro, told reporters that Ruth was a kind woman and a trusting soul, someone who had already been through a lot, but still believed in love and people. And that belief may have led her right into the hands of a killer. Ruth's family, especially Brittany, became her voice after the FBI's breakthrough. They spoke about her beauty, her kindness, and the way her laugh filled a room. She wasn't just a skull in the dunes. She was human, and she had dreams. Brittany even got to see photos of Ruth that the public never did. Family pictures and smiling moments, the kind of memories that hurt more once you know how the story ends. Why it matters. It took 48 years to give Ruth Marie Terry her name back. That's almost half a century of being known only as a nickname, Lady of the Dunes. She was a faceless victim, a body in the sand. But names matter. They carry identity, memory, and dignity. And restoring Ruth's name wasn't just about closing a file. It was about reminding the world that she mattered, that her life, her pain, her story wasn't just something for crime buffs or forensic textbooks. It was real, and it touched real people. But why did it take so long? Why did this case, despite the brutality, the strange clues, the sketches, the reconstructions, stay cold for nearly 5 decades? It's a painful question with a hard truth, because Ruth's story looked like a lot of other women's stories, and it's about the people who never gave up, the cold case investigators, the relatives, the strangers on the internet who refused to let Ruth become a forgotten skull in the sand, the people of Princetown. Provincetown proved that even in the quiet corners of the world, people can make sure a story is never forgotten. That one town, united by compassion, can keep a light burning until someone finally finds the switch. There are more stories like Ruth's, more names buried under nicknames, more killers who blended in. But if this case teaches us anything, it's this. Sometimes the truth does come out. Sometimes, decades later, the wind shifts just right, and the sand gives up its secret. And when it does, we owe it to people like Ruth Marie Terry to remember not just how they died, but how they lived. Ruth Marie Terry was more than a mystery on the dunes. She was a life paused mid-sentence and now, finally, a name remembered. But this isn't the only story buried in silence. There's more, and some are even darker. We just uncovered the next one, and you won't believe where it leads. Watch it next. You're not ready for this.